Brittany. Welcome. I'm going to give you all a couple of seconds. We're running a tiny bit behind schedule today, but I'm going to give it a few minutes to give people an opportunity to realize that we are, in fact, on. And please share. Y'all know I am terrible about remembering. Hey, Nancy. I am awful about remembering to say share. So, feel free as we continue with the broadcast to type share in the comments or whatever. Share yourself or start a watch party. Whatever you can do to help us to get this word out is greatly appreciated. It is viably important. It's so important. It's vitally important, rather, that we share and help the public, the general public, become educated, especially the church, in my opinion, because there's so much domestic violence going on within the church. I am Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. I'd like to welcome you to Shatter the Silence. We are going to be talking about domestic violence victims today and why they don't leave. Why don't they just leave? This is a question that is often asked of them. It is a question that, if posed improperly, in a harsh manner, in a manner that denotes a lack of understanding, it can actually cause them to kind of dig their heels in and feel isolated, and continue to make choices that are not in their best interest. Okay, so it's important that we look at how we're interacting with them, what our own issues and triggers are around it as well, and try to develop more effective ways of ministering to them, encouraging them, and undergirding them. We have been on this topic now for a couple of months. The Lord has us coming forth every week and ministering. We have established a closed Facebook group. It is faith-based, so if you don't want to hear about God and Jesus and faith and hope and inspiration, it's not a group that you're going to be comfortable in. But it's open to anyone who wants to join, and it's a closed group. And so only the people who are in the group know who is in the group. And only the people who are in the group can see who's in the group and see the comments that are posted in the group as well. Okay, so I just want you to be mindful of that. I am very, very careful. I'm not interested in growing the group to thousands. I see many groups, and that's fine if that's how they choose to function. But I think that it's really hard to try to keep people safe and keep it a positive, nurturing environment if you have thousands of people, in some instances running amok, sometimes with mixed motivations for being in the group in the first place. So we are intentionally keeping it small. And our focus is we want ministry leaders, those in supervisory positions, those who have a lot of people who follow them. We want them to have a place that they can talk and share their stories as well. And if you want to join because you want to offer support to someone, that's amazing. If you find once you begin to offer support that you in fact need support, that's okay too. That's what we're there for. All right. No one is strong all of the time. And as my mother used to say, even iron wears out. Hey, Gaynell. Prophet Gaynell, my friend. I love her. 2 pieces. So I'm so glad that you all have taken the time to join today. Please share. Share. I don't know how many more times I'm going to remember to say it. So, y'all help assist out, okay? So today we're going to be talking about domestic violence victims and why don't they just leave? How many of you are familiar with folk? And it's not likely that you don't know anyone who's not been affected by domestic violence because it is that prevalent. It is a silent epidemic within the church. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men. I mean, you can't go to the grocery store. Someone in line with you is either going through it, if you're not going through it, or has recently been through it, has a history of it, or something, including the cashier, okay, including the store manager, including the people who are stocking the shelves, the other customers that are in there. That's how prevalent it is. And so the same thing holds true when we go to church, all right? You go to church. Hi, Lucy. You go to church, and if you've got 10 people sitting on the same row with you, someone in that row has been affected or is currently being affected by domestic violence. It is that prevalent. So it is mind-boggling the silence that surrounds it. It's like a conspiracy of silence, okay? And we are all about shattering the silence. The Lord has given us a mandate to do so. We have no intention of shutting our mouth about it. We will continue to cry aloud and spare not, as long as He gives us strength to do so, okay? Because it's that important. We have a history ourselves from childhood and through adulthood. And so it's important for you all to understand that no one is exempt. Anyone at all can be an abuser. Anyone can be a victim. No exceptions. It does not matter how educated. It does not matter how rich, how financially stable, how brilliant, how beautiful, how handsome. It doesn't matter what kind of family you come from. You come from an upper crust family. It doesn't matter. Domestic violence abusers and victims are represented in every class you can think of. It doesn't stop at religious beliefs. It doesn't mean that folk in the church don't have this issue and folk outside the church do. There are studies who indicate that there are more problems with domestic violence within church families than without church families. That's a whole nother Facebook Live. Okay, we could talk about that for 2 sessions. So that shouldn't be. That means that we are often not what we present to the world. That after the benediction, all hell breaks loose. After that fiery sermon, we call down fire from heaven and people get delivered and they find Christ and their life changes. And then the person who delivered that powerful message goes home and mistreats their spouse, whether it be the man or the woman. Because men are victims of abuse as well. Okay? And so every opportunity we get, we're going to bust a myth. We're going to pull it apart and make it clear that it's a myth. Because this is what we've learned in our own walk. The way that we define a thing, and this was not taught to me when I was getting my degree in psychology and counseling, my degree in Christian counseling. Okay? None of that. My doctorate in theological studies. Nobody said this. This is straight from the throne room. The way that we define a thing absolutely determines how we respond to that thing. It determines if we take that thing seriously. It determines, I'm trying to wave at you, Lucy, and it won't let me. It determines how we approach it. It determines if we approach it. Hey, Sis Marie. It determines what kind of strategy we bring to the warfare. So if we underestimate the weaponry that the enemy is using, we are marching off the board to get our hind parts beat, right? And we cannot say that God failed us. We were not equipped properly. And it's not that the equipping is not available. Understand that. Hosea stated that the Lord said that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And you often hear me say, we stop right there. Our people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. But it doesn't stop there. There's a semicolon there, which means that there's more to continue that thought, right? But because thou hast rejected knowledge. So it's not the not knowing that keeps us bound. It's not our lack of knowledge alone that keeps us bound. It is when we have an opportunity, right, to educate ourselves, to equip ourselves. When God has provided a way for us to equip ourselves, we partake of it, we reject it for whatever reason. Because usually the reason is it's going to require that we change something that we're doing, that we change a thought process that we have embraced, that we change the path that we're on. And we're not willing to change. We act like we're allergic to change, right? So it's when we have access to knowledge. It's all around us all the time, right? And we reject it. That's a choice. We're choosing to go our own way as opposed to listening to sound counsel, as opposed to listening to experts, as opposed to listening to others who have walked through this very same thing and somehow managed to survive. When we begin to think that our situation, our circumstance is different Therefore, this information, this education, this knowledge does not apply to my situation because I'm special and I'm anointed. It's when we set ourselves up to get what people get when they reject knowledge. Okay? Is that clear? Don't need to explain it another way. I'm telling you, once I grasp this, when we can stop being spooky as church folks, stop being so heavenly minded that you're no earthly goods, even to yourself. Stop being so spooky and sprinkling fairy dust and spiritualizing every single thing. Some of this stuff we have to accept responsibility for, and that is the spiritual aspect of it. In the realm of the spirit, we are responsible for getting equipped. We are responsible for developing our relationship with Christ. We are responsible. Not the pastor, not the bishop, not the apostle, not the evangelist, not the teacher, not even the Sunday school teacher. These people are required to present the information, right? To make it available, to make it clear. At the end of the day, we each have a responsibility to either embrace it, right? Hey, Elkie, hey, buddy, or to reject it. So the Bible declares that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge. And then it goes on to say, and because thou hast rejected knowledge, I've rejected you really from serving in a position of leadership. We cannot lead people anywhere if we're afraid of our own shadow. We can't, right? And so we know that whatever we lack, God has, and all we have to do is ask for it. We don't need a 2-page prayer. We don't need anybody to pray for us. We can go straight to the throne room ourselves. You repent, you acknowledge how amazing God is. Tell him what you need and expect him to provide it in some form. And that might not show up the way you want it to show up. Okay? If you're in an abusive situation, he may not send a legion of angels to your house, right, with swords on fire to get your abuser. You just may have to tap into some resources, get connected to people who can keep you encouraged until you're ready to make a decision, right? Develop a safety plan, okay? And all of that is God coming to your rescue. That is him coming to your rescue. So we need to stop getting so deep and mystical, right? The realm of the spirit is real. Don't get me wrong. It absolutely is. It's absolutely real, okay? And I've seen and experienced some things that will make your hair stand up on the back of your neck. So I know it's real. But I also know that God is a God of balance. And there's nothing that he's going to do in terms of delivering us that does not require our own participation. So if you want to be delivered, and if you want to be set free, and if you want to live your best life, and if you want to walk fully in your purpose and your calling, I have to be actively engaged in pursuing it. It's not going to pursue us, right? And in those instances where it does seek you, you have to respond to it. It's not going to just keep seeking you, right? You have to engage. So we have to engage, and we have to understand that it's not going to kill us to engage in our own deliverance. It will kill us if we don't. Okay? It will kill us if we don't. All right, so we're going to talk about why victims don't leave. Why don't they leave? And we're going to talk about why it's important that we define things appropriately. And we've talked about this a few Facebook Lives ago, about how when we define a thing, we determine how big of a threat is it? How big of a blessing is it? What's in it for me? What's negative about this thing? If the definition is inaccurate, if the definition is inappropriate, whatever solution you bring to the problem will be ineffective at best. At best. Okay, you're going to be outpowered by your enemy. And it's not because God is not real. It's because he's already declared how we need to do these things. And we're not doing it. We're not doing this in according to the instruction that's provided us in the Word of God. All right. So because we don't, then we get an outcome that we're not happy with. And then, of course, we summarily blame God because, well, I'm still in this abusive situation and I thought you were going to get me out. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing to get out? Okay. And those of us who are connected to people who are currently dealing with this, what are we doing to help them? Okay. What you don't want to do is say, why don't you just leave? That is the absolute worst thing you can say to someone who is ensnared in a domestic violence situation or any kind of bondage. Because it really denotes And the victim is so beat down that they don't really see it this way. But really, a logically thinking person would step back and say, that question indicates that you have no idea. You don't have an understanding. So if you have no understanding of what I'm going through, if you have no compassion, if you lack empathy for what I'm dealing with, it kind of disqualifies you from being the person that I share with, right? Why would I share with you what's going on truly on the inside of me if you come out of the starting block looking at me like I'm crazy, right? And so we want to be careful about how we approach people. The best thing you can do is listen and understand that maybe you're getting triggered. If you have a history of domestic violence, if you've been exposed to it as a child, if you've been through it yourself as an adult, then your reaction may be kind of off to it, okay? And maybe you're not the one that they can talk to about it. But you can certainly provide them with information. You can certainly provide them with support and encouragement and resources, right? Everything doesn't have to come from you. But there are domestic violence advocates all across the United States. You've got the Domestic Violence Hotline. You've got domesticshelters.org. You have our blog, Judah's Roar. You have Stand Up Survivor with Lisa Alexander. There are so many resources out there. You've got Against All Odds with Valerie Simon. So there are agencies, there are organizations out here who are committed to helping people to get to a place of understanding, hey, Elijah, to get to a place where they understand that they don't have to live bound, that this is not something that God is requiring, okay? This is a lie that's been told to the Lord, been told to him and on him for a very, very long time, that people need to stay. That's a whole nother Facebook Live, a whole nother one. Okay, bring popcorn for that one. Okay, so let's look at why they don't just leave. Okay, number one, 75%. And again, I'm going to share this statistic with you to help you to bring balance to how you're viewing domestic violence. Whether you're in it or whether you are affiliated with someone, associated with someone who is experiencing it, okay? 75% of all domestic violence homicides occur when the victim is actually leaving. So the fear that they will be killed, the fear that their family pets will be harmed or killed, the fear that their children will be killed is a very real fear. This is not an unrealistic, this is not, hey cousin, this is not an unrealistic fear. This is not a fear that's based in anxiety and depression. This is a very real fear. 75% of victims, right? The homicides occur while the victim is actually leaving. Point blank period. It's an established fact. Cannot argue with that. Cannot debate with that at all. So there's that fear, and that's very real fear, okay? And this is why we emphasize the importance of having a safety plan. It is imperative that you have a safety plan, okay? And I'm going to digress and touch on that for just a minute right now. For those of you who may not stay, please share this. But even if you're of the mindset that, I believe that this relationship, this partnership can work, despite the fact that I've been put in the hospital, despite the fact that I get called out of my name, despite all of these things that I'm experiencing, I believe that this can work. You still need a safety plan. You need a safety plan if you're going to stay. You need a safety plan if you're planning to leave. You need a safety plan if you're leaving right now. You need a safety plan after you're gone. Even if it's been a few years, you still need a safety plan. And the reason for this is you actually, as a victim, have very little to do with what's going on in the abuser's mind. It's typically all about them and what their perception is, okay? If you are a victim of abuse, you are not even seen as a person. You're property. You're a possession. You might disagree with that, but for the purpose of this conversation, what's important is that's what they think. So that's how they respond. Remember, we talked about how we define a thing. So if you see yourself as a victim, you'll conduct yourself as a victim. They see themselves as a victim and that you're their property. They feel they have a right to prevent you from leaving because you're doing something to them, okay? As irrational as it sounds, that's the cards that you're playing with. And so it's important to know that their thought process, they're not going to be okay with you leaving. They're just not. A lot of energy and effort and strategy has gone into keeping you submitted and keeping you small and keeping you dependent and fearful and anxious and unsure of yourself, right? All of that energy has been invested to keep you in a certain place, not to let you walk out the door, not to view you going out the door. Okay, that wasn't part of the plan. All right. And so it's important that you understand that you're working with one set of definitions and the abuser is working with a completely different set of definitions that determine what they bring to this fight. Okay. Is that clear? All right. So the dynamics of an abusive relationship are very complex. At the very best, they're complicated. They're complicated. They're not plain and simple. They're very involved. They tend to affect finances. They affect the sexual relationship. They affect the ability to go to work and maintain employment. They affect the ability to maintain friendships or even relationships with family members that you've known your entire life. Okay. So it affects everything. It affects your emotional health. It affects your physical health, your psychological health. All of that is impacted. Your spiritual health is impacted, especially as you are further isolated from anything that can kind of counterbalance the negativity that you are experiencing in that relationship, in that home. Okay, so why doesn't he or she just leave? Because men can be victims too. Men can be victims too. All right. The primary difference, I think, between a female abuser and a male abuser is that the female has fewer opportunities. Hey, Ashley, the female victim has fewer opportunities to engage in coercive control. Fewer, and we talked about this in last week's Facebook Live, where you're talking about the finances and you're talking about employment and things like that. That men still in the workplace make more than women doing the same exact job. So they have a bit more leverage in that regard. Okay. So it's not that women are less abusive, because women can absolutely be abusive. And when you find a woman who is abusive, it's no joke. It's no joke. It's no joke. Okay. The primary difference is that the physical outcome, unless a weapon is introduced, is less extreme, typically. Not always, but typically. Okay. All right. Victims' reports of abuse are often met with judgment. We've talked about this from others, both men and women. And what's interesting is you can have men and women who have been victims of abuse can sometimes be the harshest critics of those who are currently ensnared in an abusive situation. You know, it's almost like this pridefulness kicks in. Well, I got out, and so why can't you get out? And I don't know why you let him or her treat you that way, and I would never put up with this in 1,000 years. And do you care about your children and how it's affecting them? It's almost like we forget. We forget what it was like to be that person, okay? So there's that aspect of it. And then there's the aspect of the people who just are clueless and who just cannot imagine, and they have no frame of reference, okay? And oftentimes they're not interested in developing one. And so this is why Facebook Lives like this are important. This is why those other organizations that I mentioned to you are important. Because the only way we can do that is just to keep talking about it and to keep it in front of people and to help people understand that with the degree of prevalence that domestic violence has in society, and I mean worldwide, we're not just talking about the United States. And on that note, those of you, because we have like 19,000 followers, many of them are in other nations, please share this in your nation, because I can't share it with so much to a country outside of the United States. But this message pertains to the entire world. According to the United Nations, and this is just in 2017, so this is not some ancient statistic that we're just blowing the dust off of, okay? According to the United Nations, the most dangerous place for a woman in the world is in her own home. The most dangerous place for a woman is in her own home. That is crazy. That's crazy. Think about it. Worldwide, this is a problem worldwide. And so we can't look at third world countries and say, oh, it's their culture and it's the way they demean women, because that's part of it. What's our excuse over here? What's our excuse in the United States? What's the excuse in Great Britain? What's the excuse in Australia? These are all English-speaking nations, right? What's the excuse? What's the excuse? Okay? So, oftentimes they're met with harsh judgment, doubt. Okay, so if this has been going on for 2 years, why are you just now saying something? Well, have you ever called the police? Well, did you ever tell anybody at all? Did you even write it down in a journal? Was there any bruising? You never came to work with any bruises. We never saw you with a black eye. He's a judge. He's a police officer. He's a deacon at the church. He's the pastor. He's an apostle. She's the church mother. They are not capable of behaving that way. I don't believe you. Okay? This is the response that victims get when they seek help. Nobody believes them. So just imagine that you are ground to powder. You are beat down, and it takes everything in you to, one, even acknowledge that with all of your degrees and all of your education, with your upper crusty family, with your money, with your socioeconomic status, the way people view you in society and put you up on this pillar, that you are a victim of domestic violence. To even acknowledge that to yourself is a tall order. But once you scale that hurdle and then seek help, and it takes everything within you to do it, they don't believe you. They question you. Why didn't you say something? I submit to you that when we ask people that, we are flagging our own ignorance. What we're really saying is, I am clueless about what you're talking about, and I'm too prideful to admit that I don't know what I need to know in order to help you. So I really need for this to be your problem. It needs to be that you're speaking out of turn, that you are just frustrated, or you're angry because of a failed relationship, or you're angry because of something that they did a while back, and I need for it to be the victim's fault. So victim shaming is often why people don't get out, why they don't get help, okay? And why many are killed, because they don't have the wherewithal to repeatedly try to convince people to help them. Then there's the whole criminal justice system and how jacked up that is from state to state, even here in the United States. It depends on where you do it, what can happen. And then it depends on who the prosecutor is, if they're going to do anything about it at all, okay? And keep in mind, you've got abusers and victims at every level of society. So some of these people that are supposed to be in place to help, right? Whether they be first responders, the paramedics, the police officers, the judges, the attorneys, the prosecutors, they're not exempt. Some of them are victims and some of them are abusers. So how does that affect their ability to help the victim that seeks help from them? So we've got to address this at every level and every echelon of society, or we're going to just continue to spin our wheels, and every week we'll have more and more and more victims and more tragic stories that could have been prevented had we had the courage to define things correctly and really listen to an abuser and then bring the proper equipping to the situation, okay? All right. Why are they just now saying something? Oh, she's just attention seeking. He's just attention seeking. He said he wanted a divorce, and now she's saying this because she doesn't want a divorce. She said she wants a divorce, and so now he's saying this because he wants custody of the kids. All right? So these are the kinds of responses that they are met with. Victim blaming is a tremendous barrier for victims to overcome. And as I said previously, it's really about self-preservation. Okay, so when we blame the victim, here's the question. Here's the question. Why do we need to do that? Why do we need to do that? So here's my challenge to you. The very next time someone comes to you and says that they're being mistreated, and the thing that pops into your head is, oh, they wouldn't do a thing. I want you to grab a mirror, literally, grab a mirror, park yourself in front of a mirror, look yourself in the eye and say, why is it important to me that this is a lie? Why do I need for this story to be inaccurate? Take your attention off of them for a second and ask yourself, why do I need for this to be not true? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? If it is true, what does that say about me? What does that say about my ability to judge character? What does that say about my ability to be a good friend? Okay, that's my assignment. The next time someone comes to you seeking help and you need for them to be the problem. Why do I need for them to be the problem? What is it going to cost me personally if they're telling me the truth? Does it mean that I've been protecting an abuser all this time? Does it mean I've been complicit somehow? Does it mean I've been so self-absorbed I've not noticed that they are miserable and depressed and anxious? What does it say about me? Because when we blame the victim, that's really what it's about. It's about self-preservation, okay? It's about keeping intact our own view of ourselves, the way we view ourselves, the way we see ourselves, okay? Okay. Here's another thing that victims hear oftentimes. Well, what led up to that? Well, what happened before he slapped you? What happened before she slapped you? What did you say or what did you do to make them so upset? You've been with them for X number of years, so you know that upsets them. Why would you do that? Why would you say such a thing? So again, the focus becomes, what has the victim done to earn the privilege, right, of being abused? You see how ridiculous that sounds? Okay. What did you do to upset them? How could you? Now, you might get this from a therapist. Now, I am a therapist, okay? And I declare and decree unto you, if a therapist says this to you, get up and leave. I'm telling you, I am a therapist. If a therapist says this to you, get up and leave. Well, now, what could you have done differently? How could you have handled this differently? Which implies that somehow it's the victim's fault, right? And somehow, because you've been with this person X amount of time, you should know how not to upset them so that they don't curse you out, call you out of your name, choke you. Not choke, strangle, because choking means you bit an apple and it got lodged in your throat, okay? Definitions are important. Strangled, okay? Punched you, beat you, okay? How could you have handled this differently? I'm going to give you an inside secret. Oftentimes when a therapist says that, they don't know what else to say. You heard it here first. They are at a loss. In their mind, they are like clueless where to go next with whatever you just said. They're feeling overwhelmed. They don't know what else to say. So they throw that, well, what could you have done differently? Not all the time, but oftentimes. If you leave the session and you still don't have a sense of direction, that's what they were doing. Okay? All right. If the one making the judgment can identify something that the victim did wrong, then that makes the abuse something that can be managed, right? Even prevented by the victim simply by not angering the abuser. And so this is what I find so disconcerting about it. And we have to recognize when we're doing it. So when you're looking for a reason to blame the victim, as I said previously, it's still just about self-preservation. So it comes down to, what is it that can be done to prevent this from happening? And if it can be prevented, then even if it shows up in my own life, then it can be prevented. Therefore, it's not a big deal. Therefore, everybody calm down and go back to doing absolutely nothing about this. Okay? And so this is why we find ourselves in this circle where we hear about these cases. Everybody's appalled. Oh my God, that's horrible. That's tragic. And nobody does anything any differently. How many of us actually survey our own lives when we hear about these stories, when we hear about these things that happen? A bailiff, a deputy sheriff, who actually was on a reality TV show, Court TV, murdered his wife. TV star, sworn to protect and serve, killed his wife. First responders. There was a string of incidents when I lived in Florida a couple of years ago where you had deputy sheriffs killing like their entire family and then killing themselves. Okay, these are the people that you call when you have a problem at your house, right? But they have the same struggles and the same issues and the same concerns. So no one is exempt. I cannot emphasize that enough. No one is exempt. No one is exempt. No matter how much, hey Jeannie, no matter how much we may admire them, no matter how much we may think they're amazing and they're anointed and they're gifted and all those other things, no one is exempt. Absolutely no one. Okay? Sometimes victims are flat out not believed. Okay? And I think, in my opinion, it is still about self-preservation when we don't believe them. It's like, why do I need to believe? Why do I have such a strong negative reaction to the thought that this person that I love or admire or respect or look up to, right, could be an abuser? Why am I not willing to at least consider it? What is that strong reflex about? What is that about? Because whatever it's about, it's causing us to not be able to discern accurately the people that are around us and what they actually need, okay? So another reason that victims stay is self-blame. They blame themselves. I'm smarter than this. I've got 5 degrees. I have a doctorate. I have a master's in divinity. I've got this. I own a business. I own 2 businesses. I'm a therapist. I'm a doctor. I'm a nurse. I'm a judge. I'm an attorney. I work at Waffle House, but I'm their star employee. I'm smarter than this. I've been through a lot. I didn't witness this in my family, so this can't be happening to me. I can't tell my family because we weren't raised this way. So I feel like I let them down. These are all the things that a victim struggles with that will cause them to stay in an abusive situation, even when it's clearly illogical to stay there, okay? Even when their life is clearly at risk, all right? So self-blame. They're embarrassed. They're filled with shame. Negative responses that we've already talked about from family and friends or even first responders are really devastating. It's taken everything in them to muster up the courage to report it at all, and now they're not believed. And they feel like, I don't have the energy to try to do this again. I cannot share this story again. I'm too embarrassed. I'm too hurt. All right? They feel badly about what their children are experiencing. Their self-confidence takes a hit. They aren't the confident person that they used to be. Now, let me just say this. The myth that abusers look for women and female abusers look for men who lack self-confidence, who don't have much, who are isolated, is true to an extent. But the other thing that is true is what they really look for is someone that's got their stuff together. They look for someone who's smart, someone who's educated, someone who has financial stability, someone who has a vision and a dream and drive, right? Someone that can produce something, someone that everybody loves, someone that everybody loves and enjoys and looks up to. Why? Why? It's a challenge. It's a challenge, and there's something to be gained there. If you don't have anything at all in the first place, there's absolutely no point in fooling with you. No point. There's nothing to be gained. Nothing to be gained. Okay? Nothing. So, this is why, even in an abusive situation, if the abuser is able to get the victim belittled and ground down enough, they go outside of that relationship and find more supply. So you'll usually find that they're not even faithful, okay, if you can even use that word in an abusive situation. They're not faithful sexually, emotionally, any of that with the person that they've beat down, because there's really not a whole lot more to get from you except the pleasure of knowing that they've got control of another human being. But in terms of actually gaining things, they need new supply. They need new supply. So they're gonna see other people. They're gonna do something else because they're self-preservation. This is how they live. This is how they survive. Okay. 9 times out of 10, you're talking about a narcissist, and at the end of the day, it's all about them and them having what they need. And anything that you do that is counter to what they've directed you to do is viewed as a deliberate attempt to undermine them. It can't possibly just be that you're just trying to better yourself. You're doing it to make them look bad, feel bad, etc. Okay? So again, how we define things is important. And it's important when you're in an adversarial situation that you understand how your adversary is defining things. You need to know what your definition is, but you need to be familiar with how they define things as well, so that you know how to navigate it. Okay. Other reasons that victims don't just leave. Lack of financial resources. Okay, let's come out of the heavenlies, right? And let's just talk about real life. It takes money to move, even if you're just moving around the corner. If you're talking about getting an apartment, they typically want first and last month, a security deposit. Then they want to look at your credit and all this other stuff. They want references and all of that. Okay. So even to get into an apartment, even to get into like these weekly places where you can go rent for a week, they want their money up front. They're not trying to present you with a bill after you've been there 7 days. They want their money up front. And then in the next 7 days, you can pay them some more. And that's how that works. It takes money, which is why planning is vitally important. Okay. Oftentimes this is impacted by the abuser's attempts to sabotage the victim's ability to work. So if I am jeopardizing your job because I'm calling when you're not supposed to get personal phone calls, I am showing up and I'm arguing, I am sitting in the parking lot acting like a nut. If I'm doing these things, then I'm sabotaging your ability to even maintain your job. So the victim is on thin ice, even in terms of their employment. If you work overnights and you come home and you need to go to sleep, you need to sleep X number of hours so you can go to work and be fresh and at the top of your game, and the abuser wakes you up after 2 or 3 hours and decides they want to have this deep and mystical conversation about whatever, why you burn the toast, why there is no toast, why the socks don't match, whatever. It doesn't have to be anything important. The objective is to disrupt the sleep pattern and to thereby affect your ability to function on the job. If that happens frequently enough, no matter how understanding your boss is, you stand a very good chance of losing your employment, therefore making you financially dependent on who? The abuser. Okay, so financial implications are key. They're important. Okay, so there's the finances and the ability to maintain your job. The abuser may threaten to harm anyone that they view as a support to the victim. So that will cause a victim to stop sharing and to pull back because they believe that they're protecting the people that they care about. Okay. The abuser threatens to harm or kill pets is another reason. Many places, if you do move, what if you can't take your pet? So you find a place to move to, but they don't accept pets. You find a place that you can afford and they don't accept pets. If they do accept pets, they want a hefty pet deposit most times. Usually it's at least $100. I've seen it as much as $500 per pet. If you have 2 or 3 pets, they want that per pet. So now you're paying almost more for the pet than you are for yourself just to get out of an abusive situation. Many times people can't do it. Well, take the pet to a shelter, you may say. The majority of shelters are kill shelters. If the pet is not adopted within a certain amount of time, and it varies from shelter to shelter, they will be euthanized. So, you leave the abuser, you take the pet to a shelter. If nobody adopts this pet, the pet is being killed. That's a hard thing, okay? So that's another obstacle that a victim has to deal with. The abuser can threaten to harm children. Now let me say this. Oftentimes, the abuser might be, or she might be abusive, might victimize the the partner in the relationship. Do not tell yourself, oh, but she's a good mom. Oh, but he's a great dad, and they would never. There are so many instances where once the abuser understands that they no longer have control over the victim, that they do murder their own children. I'm not talking about stepchildren. Their own actual biological children. Simply because they know that that parent, that the victim loves those children or that child with all their heart. So their hatred for the victim supersedes any caring that they had for their children. Okay, so that's a serious gamble. Don't tell yourself that. Oh, they don't like me. Oh, we don't get along, but they love their kids. That's a big gamble. That's a big gamble, okay? And too often we find that is not the case. Okay? Sometimes the reason that victims stay is that there's a lack of a viable safety plan. You don't have a safety plan. And it's difficult to put one together at the drop of a hat. It can be done, but it's difficult to put a solid plan together that way. And so this is something, like I said, that you need to consider if you're in an abusive situation. Whether you plan to stay from now on, you need one if you plan to stay. How are you going to stay safe in it? How are you going to stay safe when you plan to exit? How will you stay safe once you are gone? All right? If you want a template for a safety plan, subscribe to our blog at Judah's Roar, www.judahsroar-r.com. When you subscribe, you will be emailed a template that we developed for a safety plan that will at least give you all of the areas that you need to consider. All right, for yourself. And if you don't need it for yourself, I'm telling you, someone around you needs it. So it's free. Go ahead and make yourself get a copy of that. It's a good thing to have. Okay. Another reason is fear of retaliation from the abuser if the abuse is reported to police. So the victim is afraid oftentimes that if I make a police report, and what if they don't believe me, or what if they don't do anything about it? Now the abuser is going to really be mad because I made a report. Please make a report. It needs to be documented. It needs to be documented. So many times, victims are murdered or seriously injured, put into intensive care or whatever, and there's never been a history. And it's not very likely, beloved, that someone just got up one day and said, I'm going to kill so-and-so. Typically, there's been some abuse. It's been escalating, and it's been going on for quite some time. And oftentimes, there's zero report. There's no report. So a police report will at least flag it in the system. Okay? A police report will at least flag it. The other thing to consider is this. First responders are even at risk when they respond to a domestic violence call. A few weeks ago, there was a young lady who was killed, and she was a new police officer, and she was just helping the woman to get her belongings out of the home, and the abuser opened fire. The abuser opened fire. So when someone is in an abusive mode, they are not at all concerned about your status in life. The fact that you are armed means nothing to them. They are all about protecting their supply, okay? And so you cannot apply logic to an illogical situation and get a positive outcome. All right? If the abuse has been psychological, financial, verbal, or emotional, or even physical, it's difficult to prove. So it's difficult to prove if you don't have physical serious injury. And let me share this. And we did a Facebook Live several weeks ago about choking versus strangulation, okay? In strangulation, which is any time someone puts their hands or ligature, an object of some sort around your neck or prevents you from breathing, whether it's with their hands, whether it's with their forearm, with a knee, whatever it is, they compress your airway to the point where you cannot move oxygen. That is strangulation. It's not choking. It's strangulation. Okay? And it sounds so much worse than choking because it is. Okay. Typically, choking happens when you're eating something and it goes down the wrong way, or it's a little bit too large and it blocks your windpipe. Okay. Um, it's unintentional. It's completely accidental. There's no way for someone to accidentally put a ligature around someone's throat, to accidentally put their forearm, to accidentally do a chokehold. These are all intentional things that you have to process in order to do. There are steps involved in doing them. Okay. Um, and oftentimes victims are strangled. Most of them do not seek medical help. And sometimes they can die weeks later as a result of the strangulation that occurred a few weeks ago. It is possible for someone to be seriously strangled. It does not matter if you are white, black, Native American. We all bruise differently, but it is possible. And 50% of the time, strangulation can occur and there is no outward physical evidence of strangulation. So if someone comes to you and says, he or she strangled me, and you say, well, let me see your neck. Oh, I don't see any marks. It couldn't have been that bad if it happened at all. It's completely erroneous. Completely erroneous. There's an entire institute established several years ago to examine strangulation. That's how big of a problem it is. And over the past 10 or 12 years or so, many states have made it a felony to put your hands or ligature around someone's neck. That's how serious it is. It's possible to die from injuries, internal injuries from strangulation. All right? And you can look up our Facebook Live. We did this several weeks ago. Choking versus strangulation. It's possible to literally die from internal injuries that were not visible due to strangulation. So it's important, if you have been a victim of strangulation, that you seek medical attention. There's examinations that they can do. There are special cameras that they can use to see if there's any internal injury. Okay, so please, 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 if you passed out or not, if you lost consciousness or not, seek medical help. Please, please. Okay. All right. Another concern is that if the victim fights back, right? If a victim fights back, and I've seen this happen to people, where if they fight the abuser back, the police are called, the victim has injuries, the abuser has injuries, or the first responder doesn't feel like trying to figure out who the aggressor was, everybody gets arrested. So now, the victim now has an arrest record. The victim now needs an attorney. If there are children involved, the victim is going to probably lose custody, at least temporarily, of their children. So these are all very real fears. These are all reasons why victims don't just simply leave, okay? The victim may feel partially to blame because they're feeding into that, oh, well, I made him or her angry and that's why they did it, or they were tired and I knew it. I should have waited until later to try to bring up this subject, or I shouldn't have burned the toast, whatever. But when you start buying into the enemy's definition, okay, then it'll throw you off. It'll throw you off your game and you're no longer thinking clearly, okay? If the victim is financially dependent on the abuser, and the abuser is arrested. So you abuse me, right? I call the police. I'm not working, or I am working, but I'm not really making that much. You pay the majority of the bills as the abuser. This is how you keep the balance of power. Everything is in your name or whatever. Maybe my name's not even on the lease. I call the police. Maybe because you strangled me. I call the police. There's evidence that you strangled me. They arrest the abuser. How am I going to pay the bills? It's a very real concern. If the abuser is arrested and the victim is dependent on them financially, how are they going to live? How are they going to feed their children? A very real concern, okay? Why am I sharing these things? So that we can think about it before we let these words fly out of our mouth. Well, why don't you just leave? Okay, the long litany of reasons why people don't leave, all right? Abusers often gaslight onlookers by setting the stage in advance to present the victim as mentally or emotionally unbalanced, attention seeking, provoking, etc. And the abuser is trying to rescue them. So oftentimes, behind the scenes, your in-laws are being told how horrible you are. Your friends are being told how horrible, how out of balance you are, and how attention seeking and how difficult it is to live with you. But they are really going to do their level best to make things work. Okay? So they're cultivating flying monkeys behind the scenes. It sets the stage for when there is a precipitating incident, when there is an incident, because there will be one, because there always is one, right? That it appears that the victim is the problem, even to those who would typically be a support system. You see how complex it is and diabolical it is? That a crafty abuser will have people who love you looking at you sideways and thinking that you're the problem, thinking that you're being unreasonable. Hey, Dr. Jen, thinking that you're being unreasonable, thinking that they're trying to salvage you somehow and you're being ungrateful. Okay, so they're setting the stage. Some victims don't see themselves as abused. Rather, they consider themselves really strong and learning how to live with a very troubled partner. And if this is the case, you'll often hear this. They are difficult to live with. You know, they do have their ways. I am the only one that they listen to. I am the only one that can reach them. Listen. You listening? If someone tells you that you are the only person that they can hear or listen to or respond to, nobody else can reason with them, nobody else can talk to them, run. They are stroking your ego and they are ensnaring you. There should be more than one person on the planet that can reason with them. That is way too much responsibility for one human being. Okay? It's too much responsibility. It makes it your responsibility then if the bottom falls off, if the wheels come off the bus, right? If they do something really crazy, it's your responsibility because you didn't bring your A game to talk them out of it. That's a setup. And it's a manipulation, all right? And it's premier gaslighting is what it is. It's premier gaslighting. Okay? So, according to writer Leslie Morgan Steiner, it can be attributed to crazy love. So she says she experienced this where she fell into thinking that she was the only person who could talk to someone. It's very intoxicating. It's very intoxicating. You have a person who has a hair trigger temper, or who makes horrible choices, or who has an addiction, or who is struggling with whatever they're struggling with. They have an abusive personality. And if they can get you to believe that they listen to you and you are the only one, how will they do that? They'll listen sometimes, but not all the time. And get you addicted to the thought that you can affect their behavior and ultimately save them from themselves. I'm going to tell you what the Lord told me. He told me this. You can educate people. You can be supportive of people. You can pray for people. But you cannot save them from themselves. They're going to fall victim to their own tendencies until they address, okay, those tendencies that are unhealthy. They're going to have to make a decision to stop doing it. You cannot do it for them. You can't love them enough for them to do it. They have to do it. And they have to choose to do it. Okay? So I'm telling, again, did not learn that in therapy school. Did not learn that in seminary. I'm telling you what I know for myself. Okay. Over 500 women are killed every year in the United States alone. And women ages 16 to 24 are 3 times as likely to be a domestic violence victim. Abusers also create the illusion in the beginning that the victim is the dominant Man, this right here, listen, you don't get nothing else out of this. In the beginning, there's love bombing, and we've talked about that, right? In a separate Facebook Live. And we'll go into more detail about that in the future. But in the very beginning, the abuser makes the victim feel like they're the powerful one in the relationship. The sun rises and sets in them. They are driving the direction of the relationship. I've never met anybody like you before in my life. You have this effect on me. You know, I've got a new leaf on life, and I believe I can do anything with you. And sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds really good. But it's an illusion, and it's not accurate. Okay, how do they do this? They share their own history. They share or fabricate their own trauma history. Sometimes they make it up and haven't had a trauma history. They have not had, they Google it or something. I don't know. But sometimes they don't even have a history of trauma. They're just making it up. They need to pull on the heartstrings. If they do have a trauma history, they'll share it. They may share it rationally, or they may embellish it a bit to spark that inner rescuer, right, that many folk have. And then you put on your cape because you can help them. You can help them because you've got experience with this. You can help them because you don't have experience with it, and you can show them a better way to live their life. It is all a ruse to get you ensnared, to get you to defining things the way that they want you to define it, okay? So they share their own history. They learn all about your history. Oh, I can talk to this person. I can tell them all these horrible things that I've experienced. I cannot tell you how many victims say this to me. I can't believe that he or she is treating me this way. They're doing everything that I told them that my ex did, that I hated, that almost destroyed me, that almost killed me, that sent me to a psychiatric hospital, that had me relapse into my drug addiction, that had me relapse into my alcoholism. I told them everything. They promised that they would never do it. And then they did the same thing. I'm devastated. What you've done is explain to the enemy exactly how to destroy you. They didn't have to experiment. They didn't have to fumble around with this or that or the other. They could skip the gaslighting and go straight to what they knew would debilitate you. How did they know? You told them. That is how. So it's one of the strategies that abusers use. They want to know all about you, every time you were ever mistreated, what happened with every relationship that you had before our relationship, okay? And then they use it against you. They'll say, it's you and me against the world. Nobody understands you but me. Nobody cares about you but me. Let's move. Let's start over. New place, let's go where neither one of us knows anybody, and we can just build a life there. That is a tightrope. It's isolation. You won't have any support where you're going. Arguably, they don't have any support where they're going, but they don't depend on other people anyway. So they don't need the support, right? The victim needs the support. The abuser doesn't need the support. The abuser needs isolation, okay? We're still talking about why victims don't leave. All right. So, there are different stages. The first stage is you seduce and charm the victim. Tell me all about you. You're amazing. I've never met anyone like you before in my life. And all of that may be true. But why are they emphasizing it is the question. The second stage is isolation. Like I said, let's move. Okay? You convince the victim that it's us, and as long as we have each other, that's all we need. Which is not Bible, by the way. The third stage would be that you introduce the threat of violence. So that might be body language. It might be a little edge in the voice. It might be posturing, anger, isolation, withdrawal. Giving a glimpse of there's another side to me that you've not fully seen. But it's in here. And it's something that you need to respect. And it's something that you need to be mindful of. Okay? Then the next stage would be an actual physical assault. And the fifth stage would be to kill the victim. If you stay long enough, someone dies. Another thing that can cause victims to stay is being concerned about being stalked, um, being followed to work, the abuser sitting outside of your place of residence if they find out where you live, following your family members, showing up at your job, showing up at your doctor's appointments, or what, wherever they know that you will be. The stalking is real, and oftentimes it leads to further violence. Victims are often considered damaged goods by others. They're often considered self-sabotagers. They brought it on themselves. They didn't listen or whatever. So then sometimes they're punished by people who should be their support system, and they're judged because they did not take their advice previously, right? Thereby keeping themselves safe. Domestic violence is often viewed as a woman's issue, which is a faulty definition. It's viewed that way by society, and it kind of handicaps us because most victims are women, although men can be victims, and most abusers are men, right? Also, if an individual is a part of the LGBTQ community, if they are, which isolates them further, right? If they're in that relationship and they've not come out, then reporting it or sharing it, calling the police, any of those things will out them. So not everybody will know. And perhaps they're not ready to deal with the fallout from that, okay? Because that's a separate issue in the minds of family members or whatever. That's a whole nother bailiwick. So that alone can be a problem. Other reasons. Cultural or religious reasons. Listen. The catalyst oftentimes for what we do as an advocate are the religious underpinnings that are complicit in keeping people ensnared in a domestic violence situation. Even in 2019, even in modern day, English-speaking countries, you have people being advised to stay. You have scripture being misappropriated. Christians don't want to fail God. They're often told God hates divorce. I find it interesting that everybody ignores what comes after that in the same passage in Malachi 2. Yes, he hates divorce, but he hates abuse of partners in relationship as well. And in Malachi 2, it goes on to say that someone who does this, who covers their garment, their partner, their wife, right, with abuse, does not have any of the Spirit of God within them. So how does it make sense that as ministry leaders, we're telling people to stay with someone who does not have the Spirit of God in them? Does that not make them unequally yoked? I'm just asking. So people have lost their lives because they've stayed. They've lost their lives because of the religious underpinnings. They've lost their lives because the person that they're talking to has a different definition of what abuse is, and a different expectation of what should be endured. You have pastors and ministry leaders who are telling people, well, as long as they're not hitting you, you should stay, because they're ignorant of the cycle of abuse, or they're guilty of being abusers themselves, okay? And the cycle of abuse, it usually starts off verbal. It usually starts off that way. And it typically escalates to some sort of physical altercation. So if I'm only to stay away, if I'm being physically assaulted, that means I have to stay in this cycle until it reaches its foregone conclusion of a physical assault. And prayerfully I don't get killed, okay? And then I can leave, but then I have to go back through the cycle again. That's absurd, and that's not God. And I'm going to keep saying it. Y'all pray for me, because I know I'm making people mad, but they'll be all right. Okay? That's horrible advice. It's horrible advice. And I submit to you that people are dying not because they don't listen to ministry leaders, but they're dying because they have listened to their ministry leaders, and they have stayed. They've stayed when they should have left. Okay? Malachi 2. There's more Malachi than talking about tithes and offerings. I'd like to submit that. And the whole chapter talks about how God feels about abusive situations. There are consequences for it. He does not want to hear from the abuser. This person does not have the Spirit of God. God does not identify with them, okay? And God hates what they are doing. Malachi chapter 2. All right. Okay, what else? If you're looking at citizenship, and this is important in this day and age too, with so much attention being, hey, Dr. Donna Jean, with so much focus being on immigration, right? And people being not documented properly and entering the United States illegally for a variety of reasons, that if someone is in the country and they are not documented, whether the abuser is not documented, whether the abuser is an American citizen, it doesn't matter. If attention is brought to their situation, they could be deported or detained, okay? And so that's a very real concern. It's further complicated if they have children and if they are detained because they aren't documented properly. So that's a tremendous, tremendous problem. There are a lot of people in the country here who maybe don't have their documentation together. You have language barriers. If they do not speak English and they're dependent upon the abuser to communicate with others or to navigate even society, day-to-day life, going to the grocery store, for example, then that's a huge problem because then they're isolated even further. All right. If they have a disability or health issues, maybe they don't draw a full employment. Maybe they get a small check every month and they're dependent financially. They're dependent physically. Maybe they need help with medical equipment. Maybe they need help with just moving about. You know, if they have physical disabilities, if they have emotional disabilities, if they have debilitating depression or stress or whatever, then they've become dependent on the abuser. And so that's a problem. Low self-esteem is another hurdle. Keeping the family together, that age-old reason for staying in a crazy situation could be the reason. Being illiterate. If you're dependent on the abuser for literacy, you cannot read, you cannot write, right? How challenging is that? If the abuser is a law enforcement officer, a military individual, a judge, an attorney, a doctor, etc., then concerned about how reporting it will affect their career. Much less triggered more abuse, but how will it affect their ability to earn a living? Am I taking their career from them if I report them and they occupy these situations? Now, we've talked about cases in Shatter the Silence where there was a judge, where there has been a doctor, where there was an attorney. These are people who were highly respected in the community who went on to murder their spouses. Okay, so again, anyone can be a victim. Anyone can be an abuser. All right. If the victim is mentally ill or developmentally challenged, it may be more difficult for people to believe them, understand them, support them, help them, but they feel further isolated. All right. If they don't have a place to go, if they've never worked or they don't have any marketable job skills, that is a challenge. If they lack knowledge of resources, which is why I'm saying that, you know, maybe you're not the person that the Lord would say, well, open your home to an abuse victim. Because yes, it does put you at risk. Absolutely. I've done it. I will do it again. Okay. Count the cost. I'm doing it anyway. All right. That's me. I'm not saying that that's something that everybody should do, but I am saying that there is something that everybody can do. You can share this video. You can go on our Lion of Judah Global Impact Ministries Facebook page or my personal Facebook page and share. You can share and tag folk if you need to. All right. You can share it and send it to them in Messenger. You can put them in contact with me or Lisa Alexander or the Domestic Violence Hotline or Valerie Simon with Against All Odds. There are too many resources out here that we have access to not help somehow, okay? So when they lack resources, when they don't even know where to start, all right, give them something to read. Give them a website. Connect them with someone who can talk them through the process, all right? If they have a past criminal record, they may still be on probation or parole. The abuser may threaten to have them arrested. I'm going to punch you in the face. All right. And when they come because you called them, they're going to run your number and they're going to arrest you because you have a warrant for X, Y, and Z. Okay. So, what's the moral to the story? Obey the law. If you don't have these things going on in your life, then you don't have to worry about it being used against you later. Okay. You empower the wrong people when we don't do what we're supposed to do. So, but that's one stumbling block for people who may find themselves in an abusive situation. That if the police are called, they're going to be arrested for something totally unrelated to the abuse. Okay. Prior negative court outcomes. Many times people go to court and things don't go well in court. And so they don't want to go through that again. They don't want to report the abuse. They don't want to have the abuser arrested, to go to court, to have a prosecutor who doesn't do anything at all. I read a story just yesterday about a man who spent 60 days poisoning his wife's coffee. She was getting sick and she couldn't understand why she was getting sick. She put in a hidden camera. Hey, Jason, she put in a hidden camera in their home and caught him on video drugging her coffee. The last cup of coffee that he drugged was the equivalent of like 8 sleeping pills. They had him on video doing this. Guess what he got? They went to trial. The prosecutor pushed it really hard, wanted him to get like 100+ days at least in jail for this. He admitted that he did it. He got sentenced to 60 days, served only on the weekends so he could continue to go to work. Outcomes like that cause victims not to want to come forward because literally he got less than a slap on the wrist. His job is not in jeopardy because he can serve his time on the weekends. She has since divorced him, but clearly he was trying to kill her. She would fall asleep while she was driving and everything else, right? And that's all she got. So our entire system needs to be reformed, okay? So prior negative court outcomes. The abuser gaslights or hoovers, uses the children. We don't want to leave mom. We don't want to leave dad. Let's all stay together. The belief that they must tolerate their abuse and thereby show a commitment to their faith. Okay? God does not require that you tolerate abuse. God does not require that I tolerate abuse. He does not. We need to stop misappropriating scripture. That is not scriptural. It is not scriptural. It is not scriptural. Okay? No job skills. We talked about that. If the victim lives in a rural area, if they live way out in the country somewhere where there aren't a lot of resources, they don't have anywhere to go, they don't have access to information, maybe they don't even have a strong internet connection so that they can Google. All of these things can be barriers to a victim leaving. Okay? They may feel that it's safer to stay. Substance abuse or alcohol abuse can cause them to stay. Trauma bonding can cause them to stay. Now, we talked about trauma bonding in a separate Facebook Live. And we talked about how there's even there's brain chemistry that's involved that will cause a victim to literally, there are chemicals that are released in the brain when the abuse is occurring under traumatic circumstances. Then there's a different chemical, dopamine, that is released when the abuser hits that part in the cycle where they are apologetic and buying gifts and they want to cuddle and they're sorry and you know I love you and I would never treat you like this again and it's just you and me against the world. There's a separate chemical, the dopamine, that is released literally in the brain. Okay? And so this is why the victim often seems to only be able to receive comfort from the abuser. So even if they leave, they tend to go back. And on average, a woman leaves 7 times before she leaves for good. And that's if she doesn't get killed one of those other times. Okay. So there's an actual physical withdrawal when they are away from the abuser. A physical withdrawal. They don't feel well. They feel sick. They feel depressed. They need physically to be around the abuser in order to try to restabilize. The only way around that is just like with any other addiction, you stay away from the substance. You endure the discomfort, you endure the discomfort, you endure the discomfort, and you stay away. And you can begin to gain strength again. But when you go back, you feed the addiction. Okay? So it's not just about them choosing to stay away. It's not about them not being strong enough to stay away. There's an actual chemistry that is occurring in their body that demands that they reconnect with the abuser. Okay? These are are reasons why victims don't leave. Okay? And so when dopamine is released, it's in the brain, it's because they feel like they're pleasing the abuser, the one who was so disapproving of them and who was so angry with them and so disgusted with them, that this dopamine soothes them and it calms them down, right? A similar reaction to gambling addiction, to drug addiction. It's like an addiction, okay? Let's see what else I want to share. We're almost done here. So symptoms of that withdrawal that I was just talking to you about is craving a toxic relationship, deciding to stay, and it's not a reflection of a personal weakness. It's actually a chemical activity that's going on. It's important to know that, so that when you're dealing with the victim, you're not defining them as someone who's just too weak to stay away. That these are all the things that they are up against, okay? It's the brain's normal response to an abnormal intermittent reinforcement. So the reason that gambling is such a strong addiction, for example, is not because the gambler wins all the time. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. But there's that hope of the win, and there's that exhilaration that accompanies the win that keeps them chasing it. So it's the same thing in an abusive relationship. The victim goes through the abuse. What they're chasing, what they're craving, is that part of the cycle where the victim is being comforted by the abuser, being encouraged by the abuser, wounds being bandaged, dinner being fixed. Let's go out. Let's go on a vacation. Let's spend more time together. All those things that they've always wanted the abuser to do that the abuser was not willing to do. Okay? And that intensifies the trauma bond. All right. The craving stage is not permanent. It feels like it is, but it's not. And it's important for victims to know that. The brain simply needs time to recover. A calm environment and self-care are needed. No contact is the best way to accomplish this. Stumbling blocks to this are an emotionally charged environment, continued engagement with the abuser, seeking an apology or an explanation, or getting hung up in anger as a victim and being focused on retaliation. All of that, if you look at it from a biblical standpoint, is seed time and harvest. It's something that you're investing into the situation, and now there's a harvest to be expected from it, okay? So these are all reasons why victims don't simply leave. And my parting challenge to you is this. The next time someone talks to you about an abusive situation, if your knee-jerk response, if your gut response is, oh, that can't be true, pause, hit the pause button, find a mirror, an actual mirror, look in the mirror and ask yourself, why do I need to believe that this is not true? What's in it for me? What do I get to keep if I can believe that this is not true? What thought process do I get to hold on to? What changes can I avoid making in my own life if this can be a misunderstanding? Okay, that's the challenge. We appreciate your time on today. We are grateful to the Lord for what He is doing. We are committed to crying aloud and sparing not. It's important that victims know that they are not alone, that there is help out here. It is important that those of us who are not victims understand that we have a responsibility to one another. We have a responsibility, okay? And it can appear to be an insurmountable task, but it's not, because all things are possible with God. He just needs we need to care enough to do something about it and to be intentional about it. To be intentional about it. To pay attention, to know what to look for, to know what to say and what not to say. Along those lines, we offer online courses at Anointed Fire Empowerment Courses. We have our blog, Judah's Roar. And you can find all this information by checking out our Facebook page. We do have a closed Facebook group. It's faith-based, and it's called Dominion Over Domestic Violence. You can hit me up and ask me to join that. And I'll interact with you a little bit, and then we'll determine if if it's a good fit or not. We are committed to it being a safe environment for everyone who participates. If you come in because you are a victim needing support, you could very easily morph over into someone who is providing support and help as you gain strength and get well yourself. You can come in as someone who is providing support and find out with our interactions that you need additional support, and that's fine. I submit to you that if you have a history of abuse, I don't care if it's been 20 years, if you've not addressed it directly, if you've not examined it closely, there's more to it than getting out of it. That there are behaviors and attitudes and thought processes and mindsets that you have embraced that have not been productive in your life because you've not addressed the scars, okay? It's not too late. It's never too late to address them. You can address them and live a more productive life. We love you. We will be back on next Saturday with another Shatter the Silence. We solicit your prayers, and we ask that you continue to pray for those who are dealing with the shooting in El Paso, Texas on today. And as a side note, in over 50% of cases, when you have these mass shootings, the perpetrator has a history of domestic violence. Blessings to you. This is Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson, and I'll be back on next Saturday with another Shatter the Silence.